Hi, I'm Emily from Threaded Journey. Let's create something you'll love.
Okay, my pieces are cut out, but let me show you what I did. I created fabric with a quilter's method where I sewed my back quarters together to make a long enough piece of fabric. So I just kind of designed what I thought might look good and use that. Now I made for this particular pattern a size 32 and I had 5 fat quarter squares. If you are going to make anything bigger than a 32, you're going to need more squares than that. I did make my sleeve length a little bit shorter. I took off actually a pretty significant amount there because it goes way down to the elbow and I just didn't have enough fabric, so I just made it shorter. Okay, I've clipped my shoulders here and I'm going to use a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, or as I refer to it, a 1 centimeter seam allowance. Don't forget your little triangle-y pieces sticking out here. They're supposed to do that. You want them to stick out on the inside by the neck. All right, I'm gonna go sew. Sewed my shoulder seams. I serged mine. You can use your pinking shears, little zigzag stitch, whatever you need to do so they don't ravel. And then I have pressed them towards the back. And now that little triangle just is smooth in with my back neck. Now it's time to put your bias tape in. So we're gonna start with the middle back neck and stitch that around using our 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter stitch and just kind of go all the way around. And I personally fold mine like this. I do a little triangle and then I start my stitching below the triangle, okay? Then when I come all the way back around and meet, I can overlap it and it just makes it much smoother when I fold it down. Okay, here I'm stitching it in and I'm just going slowly and just kind of stretching the top as I go to match and just slowly going all the way around the neck. Getting towards the end, I started right here. So as I come down, I'm gonna keep sewing and I'm just gonna overlap this right here until I'm probably just cut that off just a little bit once I get past the corner there, and then just stitch and meet where I started. And then when I fold it over, it'll just slide right in there. My neckband is in and I have pressed it just to make sure that I didn't have any kind of puckers or anything. That's how my binding meets and I am happy with that. Okay, I've cut down my seam allowance to now be about 1/4 of an inch, and I've put these nice little clips in it to make the neckband lay flat and round and nice. Now we're gonna understitch. Understitch means we're going to do a little stitch as close to that main stitch right there as we can without crossing it. And we're sewing through this seam allowance and the binding only. We are not sewing through the garment. We're just doing a little stitch right along here. And sometimes those little cuts may be a little bit separated, and that's perfect. That's what you want. All right, as you can see, I've got my needle as close to that seam allowance edge as I can, and I'm using that little side as my guide as I go through. And there's my needle, and it looks like this when I'm done. Right, this particular binding is not going to show, So I have ironed it all down, and I kind of did like some little tugs, just kind of stretch it a little bit to make sure it goes in around nicely. And now we're just going to do a little fold here, right up at that seam line, and fold it so that we can stitch it down. I am top stitching this to make sure that none of that binding is showing on the top. I can make sure it's nice and flat and looks good, because the bottom doesn't really matter. It's the top that matters. And I've now pressed it nice and flat, and it's time for sleeves. And I'm going to stitch a basting style of stitch for my gather stitch. That means it's going to be on my longest stitch setting. No back stitch. I want tails hanging out before and after. And I'm going to do one that is closer to the edge than my 1 centimeter seam allowance, and one that is on this side of my 1 centimeter seam allowance. And those are going to be my gather stitches. Okay, here is my sleeve all clipped in and gathered. Notice my pin right here at the shoulder seam. I put that in first, then clipped the flat part, clipped the flat part, then pulled my gathers and clipped those in. This is what it looks like when it's all sewed in. I'm going to pull out the gather stitches and finish off my raw edge with my serger, your pinking shears, zigzag stitch, however you want to do it. Right. Sides are clipped, and it's time to stitch all the way down. Okay, my side seams are in, and I went ahead and serged it. Then I tried it on. I should have tried it on, then serged it, because it's not too tight. It looks fine on, but it's a little bit difficult to get on and off. So what I mark 2.5 inches, and I'm gonna unstitch this. I unstitched to where I wanted my split to be. Then I clipped to my seam, ironed each side back the seam allowance, serged it. Then I came to the machine, reinforced this seam so that it does not unravel. Now I'm going to take it to the machine and stitch so that I'm catching that seam allowance under there. Stitch and come across here to also do a little reinforcing there and come down the other side. And that's how I'm going to create the split. All right, split hem done. Okay, I'm working on the sleeve bands now. I pressed the band in half, and then I pressed a 1 centimeter and a 1 centimeter crease. Then I stitched it together, and I went ahead and just used my pinking shears just because it was just kind of messy there from fraying a little bit. Then it makes a band that we're going to sew onto our sleeve. All right, I have sewed gathering stitches in the bottom of my sleeve, and before I started, I made quarter points. So I marked my quarter points inside. This will just help me to keep my gathers even as I'm gathering it around my band. Taking my band, I marked my quarter points with it as well, and I've put my seam right here at the seam of my sleeve, and I went ahead and pinned in the other side. I'm not pinning the quarter points because I have to be able to pull the gathers. I'm just going to try to make those gathers as even as I possibly can. All right, let me see if I can show you here. This was one of my quarter points, so when I got to it, that little line that I had made there lined up with here. So I knew I had enough gathers in this section. I just needed to spread them out enough to make it a 1-to-1 ratio. I just kind of eased everything together and it'll go in nicely on the machine. So I'm just gonna stitch right there between those lines. Okay, my gathers are in. I have serged my edges, cleaned that up. And then I have folded my band over, and that other side is tucked in up under there. And I'm gonna stitch right here along this edge, and it will be a beautiful banded sleeve. This turned out even better than I could have imagined. I am glad I did the little split side. Sleeve length ended up to be perfect. So cute.
Thanks for watching, and you might also like these videos. Don't forget to like and subscribe.